Test. Can y'all hear me? Sounds good. All right. Thank you all so much for coming today. We gather here today as a community in the morning of a national tragedy. On May 25th, George Floyd, the loving father of 2 children, was murdered by police officer Derek Chauvin. And while 3 other officers looked on and did nothing. While the officers responsible have been held accountable and have been brought to justice for George Floyd's murder, the officers who shot and killed Breonna Taylor remained unpunished for murdering an innocent woman. And more importantly, the system that allowed this tragedy to occur remains unpunished and unchanged. Chauvin had 12 prior complaints of police brutality, yet was allowed to continue to serve as a police officer. So while we can and should hold responsible officers like Chauvin, this issue of police brutality and racial discrimination against people of color and African Americans is much greater than any one bad officer. We must say the names of those who have had their lives cut short by this system and never let them be forgotten. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Ahmaud Arbery, and many more people of color murdered at the hands of the police, and in almost every case, the offending officers getting off scot-free. And while our Wrentham Police Department has never had a serious issue of misconduct, this issue is greater than any one individual police officer or any one department. The individual so-called bad officers are the symptom of a system that has no method for holding police officers accountable, and a system that allows officers to remain on the force despite prior instances of domestic violence or other misconduct. And now our country and our Commonwealth has reached a breaking point, a point where people across the nation and across the world have said enough is enough, and are standing up to demand justice and an end to systemic racial discrimination. We are in the midst of the largest civil rights movement in history, and through direct action, education, and legislative reform, we will hold this system accountable and remake our criminal justice system from the ground up. We will demilitarize our police departments, and we will bring transparency and accountability to our police departments. Though I and many folks here today will never understand what it feels like to fear for our lives in an encounter with the police, or face discrimination based upon our race, we must all refuse to abide by a system that routinely carries out injustice. We must let African Americans and people of color share their experiences and lead this fight. But we all have a duty to help magnify these voices. There are speakers here today who will share their experiences and stories, and I ask you all, please listen to them. Speaking first is Jamil Siddiqui.
Before I get started, I just want to say that it's great to see so many familiar faces out here in the crowd tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jamil Siddiqui. I'm 23 years old. I live in Norfolk, but I went to high school right here in Wrentham, and I consider Wrentham home just as much as I consider Norfolk home. To Hunter Cohen, who organized this event, thank you. Your commitment to organize this rally is emblematic of how you would represent this community if elected to the State House this fall. I firmly believe elected officials should always show up and stand shoulder to shoulder with the community. For those of you who haven't gotten a chance to meet Hunter, I urge you all to do so, given he's from Wrentham and could very well represent our community in the near future. We can no longer afford absent leadership and tone deafness. We need elected officials who can sympathize with our constituents of color and empower us. Regarding the permit that was obtained for us to peaceably assemble here today, public safety is always critical. But in effecting change here in Wrentham, we do not need a permit to confront people in power who are racist. We do not need a permit to call out our coworkers or our neighbors for being racist. We do not need a permit to challenge racism at home. We do not need a permit to talk to our children about how making fun of someone's accent or the smell of their food is racism. And we do not need a permit to exterminate racism right here in Wrentham. Before I hand the mic off, I want to talk about something. I want to talk about systemic racism. Systemic racism is Dylan Roof being offered Burger King after murdering 9 black churchgoers horrifically, while Tamir Rice was shot dead for merely holding a toy gun. Systemic racism is Ahmaud Arbery being hunted down and shot for doing nothing but jogging while being black. And his killers uttering the same racial epithet that a former member of our community in Wrentham was caught using online just a few weeks ago. Systemic racism is the reality that Breonna Taylor's killers have not been arrested or charged. Systemic racism is me remarking to my high school teacher, history teacher, that during my experience working at McDonald's, I noticed that many of my coworkers spoke Spanish just as often as they spoke English. And his response to me in front of my whole class being that those coworkers were likely more American than I was. Systemic racism is the administration of that school being more concerned with awareness about the incident and hush-hushing it than true disciplinary action for a humiliating comment that made me feel awful. But before I hand off the mic, I want to end by sharing a quote about racism by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Racism in America is like dust in the air. It seems invisible, even if you're choking on it, until you let the sun in. Then you see that it's everywhere. As long as we keep shining that light, we have a chance of cleaning it wherever it lands. But we have to stay vigilant because it is always in the air. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Camille, for those words. Up next, Yamaya.
Hi everyone, my name is Yamaya, and I see a lot of familiar faces here today, but let me just introduce myself to those of you who might not know me. I'm from Norfolk. I grew up in the Norfolk public school system, and I graduated from King Philip a few years back. And when I graduated, I never thought I was going to come back here, but here I am. And let me tell you, it was definitely a hard decision to come back, as one of the few black people around to show face when called upon. I do thank you all so much for showing up and providing a space for my voice to be heard. But ultimately, I made my decision to speak here today for the black and brown boys and girls navigating through the subtleties of growing up in a space with very little representation. I come here today with the weight of over 400 years of oppression on my shoulders to speak the words my ancestors never had the opportunity to voice. I continue to work to this day to disassemble racism that was so deeply embedded into my psyche that it made me hate the way my coils grew towards the sun. It made me hate the physical features on my body, like my wide nose and my big lips, and think that there is something wrong with me simply because of the color of my skin. But that's what happens when you grow up in a racist community, where when you point out microaggressions or just blatant racism, you're often met with, well, they didn't mean it in that way, or it was just a joke, or even, don't make a big deal about nothing. And I wasn't really going to bring any personal experiences into this, but I will share with you one experience. As I said, I went to King Philip High School. My graduating class had very few black and brown kids. I was one of 2 biracial females. Me and this girl were friendly with each other. We were never best friends. We never walked in the hallway together. We never even had a single class together. But yet, I was called by her name by multiple teachers over and over again. As if it didn't matter, we were just the same. And these words that I'm speaking to y'all, they're my truth. They're not meant to attack anybody on their past behaviors or indifferences. We need to be unified now more than ever. and fight the system that has made bigotry the norm. Now, I think that we can all agree, most people really don't want to be called a racist. It's been coined as an attack word. It might lead one to think, hey, that person called me a racist, but I'm not a bad person, they just don't know me. And I challenge this thought process. In the words of Kendi in his book, How to Be Anti-Racist, he preaches that it isn't enough to passively claim that you're not racist, but to actively be anti-racist. Anti-racism involves taking stock of and eradicating policies that are racist and have racist outcomes. Racist policies are so deeply embedded into our nation. Public policies that have been around for decades and have upheld structural racism. Some examples being housing subsidies, to Social Security, to school financing, and of course the criminal justice system, the reason that we're all here today. These structuralized racist public policies really help to shape our worldview. And what I mean by this is that everybody has their own personal beliefs about what's right and what's wrong. We all have our own thoughts about the institutions in society and the roles of them. Government institutions like policing. These beliefs that we hold are unconsciously linked to assumptions about race, class, and gender, which are absorbed from our social world and then reinforced by these racist policies. So I urge you all to take a moment and think of a set of beliefs you may have and ask yourself, why do I believe this? What assumptions are embedded in my beliefs? And are my ideas rooted in racism? This type of deep thinking and reflection really enlightens us to see how deeply rooted racism is in our society. It points out the racial injustice and inequalities so many of us face. Once we understand the powers of internalized and externalized racism, can we really rally against it? Rallies like this are a great step. You all showed up today because you want to see change. George Floyd was a trigger for so many that enlightened us of the lack of accountability in the criminal justice system. Those whose job it is to serve and protect all of the people of our nation. I am sick and tired of seeing my Black brothers and sisters being senselessly killed. More needs to be done. We need to tap into our individual resources and actively fight racism and racist policies. Donate money to the Black Lives Matter movement if you have it, and please do your research first and find an accredited platform. Donate your time and show up to events like this. Register to vote and then go to the polls and vote. And use your voice to speak out up against racism. Because inaction is just as dangerous as racist action. Inaction has political impact. It upholds the persistence of racism, which leads to the senseless killing of so many innocent Black men, women, and children. Years of inaction and indifference is the reason the Emmett Tills, Eric Gardners, George Floyds, and so many, many more beautiful souls of this world are no longer with us. So please, do what you can and don't lose momentum. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Maya. Speaking next is Luke Morial. He's on his way.
All right, firstly, I want to thank all of you for coming out here today. It's amazing to see people come together like this, especially in a primarily white community like ours, so thank you very much. My name is Lucas Moriali, and I am 16 years old. I go to King Philip High School, but the story that I'm here to share today is not one of my own, but it is one of a man who was ruthlessly killed in 1955. This is the story of Emmett Till, and it's a very important story that many of you know and many of you may not. Emmett Till grew up in the city of Chicago. During the summer of 1955, 14-year-old Emmett Till was visiting family in Mississippi. Till, a black boy, was accused of flirting with a white woman, Carolyn Bryant, in a grocery store. She claimed that Till made both physical and verbal advances on her during her testimony, but she eventually admitted that the accusations were a lie during a 2008 interview, decades later. 4 days after this, Bryant's husband returned from a business trip. He, along with his half-brother, went to the home of Till's great-uncle and forcibly kidnapped Till, despite Till's uncle begging them to leave Emmett alone, not to harm him. They forced Till into a car, beat him, tortured him, mutilated his body, shot him in the face, and threw his disfigured body into a river. 3 days later, Till's body was found. His body was returned to Chicago, and Till's mother insisted on an open casket funeral. She wanted the world to see what these racist monsters had done to her beloved son. She exposed the world to the barbaric lynchings that were unfortunately commonplace during these times. And despite nationwide outrage at Till's murder, his killers were acquitted of all charges by an all-white jury. These two people that killed Till, they later admitted to their crimes, living their entire lives without having to pay for this inhumane atrocity. Till's murder is viewed by many as the catalyst that sparked the civil rights movement during the 1950s. People felt helpless to see a mere child murdered simply because he didn't know his place. People felt helpless to see Till's killers walk free. People were tired. People were angry. People were fed up with the lynchings, the inequality, and injustice that defined America. People were finally ready for change. We have made so much progress since then. It's hard to believe that there are still people alive today who lived through the civil rights movement. It was only 56 years ago that the Civil Rights Act was passed, legally ending Jim Crow laws. However, the fight is not over yet. It's why we are all gathered here today. And just as Till's murder sparked the civil rights movement in the 1950s, George Floyd's murder has begun a second civil rights movement now. We too are tired of injustice. We're tired of police brutality. We're tired of racially motivated hate crimes. We're tired of systemic racism. We're tired of white privilege. We're tired of cops kneeling on a man's neck for 9 minutes when he can't breathe. We're tired of cops not being held accountable for their actions. We all know damn well that if there hadn't been a video recording of Floyd's murder, those 4 cops would not have had any charges against them at all. It's frustrating to see injustice everywhere, but by protesting here today, you are all showing that we won't stand for it. By protesting here today, we're showing that we're done. We're done with all this injustice. We're finally standing up. Change is our goal, and change is why we protest. Because this protest, even though all of this started because of George Floyd, it's not just about that anymore. And the civil rights movement, although it may have been sparked because of Emmett Till, it's not just about him. It's about more than that. It's about trying to make a world where what happened to George Floyd, what happened to Emmett Till, none of that will ever happen again. It's about making sure that Floyd's death, Till's death, everyone who's died because of injustice, because of racism, because of police brutality, it's making sure that their deaths are not in vain. Floyd's murder was just the tipping point. There are countless other names out there, even more that we've never heard of. The police are supposed to be protectors of the people, but we keep seeing cases where they are the opposite. We need accountability. We need change. And that's why I'm asking you for 3 things. First of all, I want everyone to stay angry. Stay angry about the injustice, the brutality that has happened, and that will continue to happen if we don't provide meaningful change. Educate yourself and others around you. Stay passionate and make sure your voice is heard. Secondly, vote. Your vote matters. It's your strongest tool. Contact our elected officials. Let them know that we need change. We are in the midst of one of the greatest political movements in the history of our nation. This is the second civil rights movement. It is our responsibility to make sure that the change that we want so badly to happen actually happens. It is our responsibility to make sure that George Floyd and all of those others who were killed before him died for a reason. And finally, at a time like this, we must stay active. The most important question to constantly be asking yourself is, what am I doing to help? Finally, I'd like to thank Hunter Cohen for organizing this amazing protest. He's done a great job with this, and just thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to me, and I hope that you can take what I said to heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luke, for reminding us of our history and how far we still have left to go. Up next, speaking, we have Chris Courier.
My name is Chris Courier. I was raised in the Norfolk and King Philip school systems. I'm a graduated senior this year, part of the class of 2020. Thank you. I wasn't born in this country. I was born in Latin America. I moved here as a very young child. This community always treated me well on the outside, but of course, racism isn't always overt. It's covert. It lives in our closets where we can't see it. Last week, I was in Boston on the Tuesday night protest in Franklin Park, and I don't pretend to be able to speak to the racism and injustices that many people of color can. I was there to see with my own eyes and let my voice be heard for those who can't speak for themselves anymore. As the group I was with was walking down the street, a group of police officers didn't like that we were filming them handcuffing a man on the ground. So they came over to us and they pepper sprayed us in the face because we were filming them committing brutality against our brothers and sisters. This is what is happening right now. So how dare we stand by any longer and ignore it? This isn't a matter of politics anymore. This isn't red versus blue. This is a matter of morality, of humanity. It's our time to take a stand as a community. It's our time to take a stand, to let our voices be heard for those who can no longer breathe and who can no longer speak. It is time. We have decided it is enough. The only thing we can lose here is our chains, and we will not stop fighting until we have achieved justice and true equality in this country. So then what can we do? For those of us who are eligible to vote, you can vote. We can take this fight to the polls in November and in our upcoming elections. We can put in officials who will make a change for us and who will do the right thing. It is time for us to make this change. Call your representatives. Call your chief of police. Call your town officials. Let them know we will no longer be quiet. This is time for us to take a stand. And if you disagree with any of this movement at all, or if you want to speak more, come find me. Come talk to me. Let's have these hard conversations. Let's have them for the people who can no longer speak. For too long we have let this go on. I say no more. And I know you all do too. That's why you're here today. So have the conversations with your family. Have them with your friends, your sisters, your brothers, your parents, everyone you can. This can't be ignored any longer. Thank you, Wrentham.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been an honor to stand in solidarity with you in the protest in Franklin Park, Beacon Hill today, and in every protest in the future. Speaking next, Aaron Moore.
Race has always been an important topic for me because I am biracial. My mother is white and my father is black. So the idea that you could hate someone solely because of the color of their skin is something that I could never wrap my head around. While we're on this topic, people think that being biracial or light-skinned is such a walk through the park because you have the best of both worlds. Well, I'm here to tell you that could not be further from the truth. Being biracial can be a rather alienating experience. When a white person sees me, they don't see me as being white. And when a black person sees me, they don't see me as being black or being able to share in the black experience. But I'm here to tell you that I have been racially profiled more times than I can count. I am not accepted by either of the communities that make me who I am. But don't get me wrong, I am happy with the skin that I'm in. I believe that being biracial allows me to see things from both perspectives. But where do I fit in? It's a question I've asked myself for the majority of my life, and I don't expect any of you here to have the answer. but I am glad to be able to speak on the topic because it is a racial issue that goes widely ignored. So today I'd like to talk about Black lives. I know it was George Floyd's murder that brought us all here today, but I would like to use my time to talk about some Black lives that did not get the recognition that they deserve. As I tell these stories, please pay attention to what these individuals did to deserve such heinous police retaliation. First, I would like to talk about Sandra Bland, a Prairie View A&M graduate. She was on her way to her new job at her alma mater when she saw an officer speeding up behind her. She thought the officer was on his way to an emergency, so she changed lanes to let him by, but she failed to use her turn signal and was pulled over. Sandra tried to record the traffic stop, but the officer threatened to tase her if she did not put her phone away. She was then pulled out of her vehicle, violently forced onto the ground, and arrested. Unable to make bail, Sandra Bland sat in a cell for 3 days. 3 days, because she failed to use her blinker. How many of you failed to use your blinker today? On the third day, Sandra Bland was found hanging from her cell in an apparent suicide. No footage of her death was ever made available, even though a camera was in full view of her cell. I will let you draw your own conclusions about the death of Sandra Bland. The next Black life I would like to discuss is that of Philando Castile. Mr. Castile was driving through a suburb with his girlfriend and her 4-year-old daughter when he was pulled over simply because of how he looked. Before pulling Philando Castile over, the officer radioed a nearby squad saying, "The 2 occupants just look like people involved in a robbery. They just look like it." When the officer asked Mr. Castile for the license, Mr. Castile told the officer it was in his wallet, but he had a firearm that he was licensed to carry. Mr. Castile said this because he wanted to avoid any miscommunication. The officer told Philando Castile, "Okay, don't pull it out," to which Philando Castile responded, "I'm not pulling it out." The officer quickly drew his gun and fired 7 times, claiming to have feared for his life. Philando Castile was pronounced dead at the scene. After killing Philando Castile, the officer proceeded to handcuff his girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, and put her and her daughter in the squad car. Footage shows Reynolds' daughter saying, "Mom, please stop cussing and screaming. I do not want you to get shooted too." Next, I would like to tell you the story of a young woman by the name of Breonna Taylor. Miss Taylor was an emergency room technician. She had hopes of becoming a nurse and owning a house. As I'm sure many of you know, Miss Taylor never got to fulfill her dreams. Police obtained a no-knock search warrant, which included Breonna Taylor's apartment, because it was suspected that drugs had been delivered to the home. Shortly after midnight on March 13th, police used a battering ram to break down the door of the Taylor residence. Breonna's boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, a licensed firearm carrier, asked, "Who is it?" several times, but received no response. I want you all, especially those of you who are licensed gun carriers, to imagine for me, just imagine, you're asleep at home in the middle of the night next to your partner, and your door is broken open, and your home is invaded. What would you do? Would you defend your loved ones and yourself? That's what Kenneth Walker did. He opened fire on who he thought were burglars. In return, police sprayed at least 20 bullets into the home with no regard for human life. Breonna was shot 8 times and pronounced dead on the scene. No drugs were found in her home, and Kenneth Walker was charged with attempted murder of a police officer. I wish I could tell the stories of every single Black life taken too soon by law enforcement, including my own aunt, Leslie Moore. Unfortunately, there isn't enough time in the day, or the week, or the month, or even the year. So I encourage you all to do some research when you have a moment. Learn their names and learn their stories because they matter. Now, I would like to switch gears a little bit and tell a different kind of story. This is the story of a white supremacist named Dylan Roof. Dylan wanted to incite a race war, so he chose one of the most historic black churches in America as his target. On the evening of June 17, 2015, Dylan Roof walked into the Emmanuel AME Church and participated in a Bible study. He requested to sit next to Clementa Pinckney, a senator of South Carolina and the pastor of the church. When worshipers took a moment for prayer, Dylan began firing his handgun. He killed 9 innocent African Americans that day before fleeing. Among the victims was Senator Pinckney, by the way. After a day-long manhunt, police finally caught Dylan Roof. When they caught this white supremacist, this serial killer, this terrorist, do you think they tackled him to the ground? Or beat him up? Do you think they tased him or shot him? No. Dylan Roof was peacefully brought into custody without so much as a scratch. The police brought him Burger King because they thought he was hungry. They outfitted him with a bulletproof vest for his safety. Do you see the difference between the first 3 stories I told you and the last? If you're black, you can be murdered for forgetting to use your blinker, or driving through a white neighborhood, or defending your home, or writing an alleged bad check. But if you're white, you can murder 9 innocent people in prayer and be treated to Burger King. That is how broken the American justice system is. Don't get me wrong. I am an American through and through. I love this country. I cannot imagine living somewhere else. When I hear the national anthem, I get chills down my spine every time. But let's be honest, America has problems. America has a police problem, and America has a race problem. Do you know that for a cosmetologist to get his or her license, that person would have to put more hours of training in than an American police officer would need to train to receive a badge? I'm no criminal justice expert, but I think that's a problem. And that's no disrespect to cosmetologists, but let's be honest, a police officer has a little bit more responsibility. Not to mention, if a cosmetologist kills someone on the job, they will go to jail for a very long time, not placed on paid administrative leave. As for the race problem in America, if we ever hope to fix it, we need to start within our communities, our classrooms, and in our homes. During my short time in King Philip schools, I could not shake the feeling that my peers and even some of my teachers thought I was less because of how I looked. Less beautiful, less capable, and less intelligent. Less. It's an awful feeling, especially for a child going through puberty. What we all need to learn and teach each other is that we are all different. Different colors, different ethnicities, different sizes, different genders, different sexualities. Despite our differences, we are all human beings and we deserve to be treated as such. All lives do matter, but let me be very, very clear. That statement will never be true until Black lives matter. In the words of the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I grew up in Norfolk, Massachusetts, and I was living in quite a bubble of privilege, and I never really learned about my privilege until I went to college. And I'm 23 now, and I've never felt more educated, and I've never felt more strong to use my privilege and my voice for good and for people that can't speak. However, I've had to cut some of my family members off, some of my white family members, because they just don't understand. But I'm happy to see so many beautiful, wonderful people here that support this beautiful movement. So thank you. This is Oxford Town by Bob Dylan. And kind of think of Oxford Town as a metaphor for a town that doesn't really appreciate the beautiful Black people of this country. Oxford Town, Oxford Town. Everybody's got their heads bowed down. Sun don't shine above the ground. Ain't going down to Oxford Town. He went down to Oxford Town. Guns and clubs followed him down. All because his face was brown. Better get away from Oxford Town. Oxford Town, around the bend. Come to the door, but she couldn't get in. All because the color of your skin. What do you think about that, my friend? Me and my pal, and my pal's son, we got met with a tear gas bomb. Don't even know why we even come. Guess we're going back to where we come from. Oxford Town in the afternoon. Everybody's singing a sorrowful tune. George Floyd died in the Minneapolis moon, and you bet your ass we're gonna get Breonna's killer soon. Black Lives Matter. everybody. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. In times like this, it's definitely important to remember the power that songs and folk singers can have in social movements like this. Speaking next is Taya Cisse.
Hi everybody, my name's Taya Cisse. I graduated from KP class of 2015. I used to go to Tootsie's right over there, if you remember. It was an ice cream place after King Philip Might's cheerleading practice, although now I've upgraded to a gin and tonic at the Gavel instead. So I really struggled with what I wanted to say today. Like Umaya had mentioned, there's 400 years of oppression sitting on our shoulders today. So I think instead of talking about personal experiences, I just kind of want to talk about what everyone can keep doing. When everyone comes home tonight, I want you to keep this conversation going, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Everyone needs to continue to do their part, continue engaging in actions that have now led to all 4 of the officers involved in George Floyd's murder. And the officer who did the kneeling, his charge has been increased to an additional second-degree murder. Although there have been no charges made, the FBI is investigating Breonna Taylor's murder. The Minneapolis City Police plans to dismantle their police department. Right. And LA has cut $150 million from their police department budget to give back into their communities. All because of protests and rallies that have been taking place just like the one you're at today. But when these protests are over, our jobs continue, and it starts at home and at school. Teach your kids and teach them young. Thank you to everyone who did bring their kids here. I think that's really motivating to see. And I get that those conversations can be hard. You might not know where to start, which Sesame Street did the town city hall thing for racism, so if you want to use that as a resource. But at the Norfolk rally, another speaker had come up and talked about a time where she was in kindergarten and she was not allowed to attend a pool party. This 5-year-old, her other 5-year-old classmate said, "You would make my pool dirty." 5-year-olds do not have those thoughts. So if that hatred is being passed on from a parent to their child, why can't this movement be passed on from a parent to their child? Because unfortunately for Black children everywhere, we live in fear every single day. Black boys have to be taught how to act to make sure they're not the next ones murdered, to make sure they're not the next hashtag. Imagine having that discussion with your child. Here's a list of things that you have to do to make sure you're not the next person to get knelt on and suffocated to death for 9 minutes. We're gonna kneel for 8 minutes and 46 seconds later today. In that time, I want you to think how long that is when for someone to be standing on your neck, for you to be saying over and over, "You can't breathe," for to be the second Black man to sit there and say, "I can't breathe," and no one helps you. Most of you will never have to do that. You'll never have to live in fear for your life. Most of you won't know what it's like to be followed in stores. Most of you won't know what it's like to wonder if you're gonna get shot or if you're gonna get a ticket when you're pulled over by a police officer. And for a lot of you, you're not gonna have to tell your kids that that's a fear they're gonna have to live with. So instead, we need your activism. We need you to be an ally when they won't hear us say that we can't breathe. We need you to protest, donate, educate yourself. We need you to truly listen when a Black person is extending themselves past their own pain and fear to advocate just for their existence. We need you to contact your local police departments and representatives and ask them what anti-racist preventative measures they're taking. Hold them accountable. And if you're stuck on what to do or how to be a better ally, just ask, simply ask, because so much work is being done for you. So many templates are being made. So the only thing you have to do is send a quick email or make a quick phone call. There are collectives being created where in one document you have access to the best places to donate. If you'd like to offer your financial support, there's another section devoted to information. It has information based off of Black Lives Matter movement. It has information on how to talk to your kids. Like, it doesn't matter what it's on. There's such a diverse library available to you. Sign petitions. There's mental health resources because this is draining. This is exhausting. Thank you. And there's video links. There's even one right now. If you don't have the means to donate, there's a YouTube stream where all you have to do is put it on in the background, especially if you're working from home and you're doing your Zoom calls, have your phone going in the background and make sure your ad blocker is on. But the entire time that's on, you're contributing. That's something small that you can do right at home. There's a lot of work to be done, and police brutality is just the tip of the iceberg. Next is education and healthcare, hiring discrimination. We have to remember that this is not just a moment, but it's a movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking here today, Taya.
Now, before we kneel for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in remembrance of George Floyd and everyone who has been made the victim of racial discrimination and systemic violence, we will hear some healing words from Father Joe Moser.
I was clearly asked here to be here today because I'm a white middle-aged man, right? It's an opportunity and an honor to be standing here with you today because we have more that unites us than divides us. Listening to the speakers here today, I've been reminded of the things that have helped me to be able to learn more about racism in my life, and reminded of ways that I still have a long way to go, just as our nation, our commonwealth, and our communities still have a long way to go. Thankfully, drawing on one of the other speakers, I was raised by parents who knew that it was important to teach against hate, against violence. I happened to be born on the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And my parents used that as an opportunity, among other opportunities, to teach me from when I was young, and I am very grateful for that. Thank you to all of you who are parents or who have the opportunity to work with people, young and old, in teaching respect, love, and unity. I was asked here to share some excerpts from Cardinal Sean's letter that was just released a couple days ago, and his message a week before that is being sent to all consistently to expand our general understanding of racism. In word and deed, they have pointed to the reality of systemic and structural racism. We do bear a heavy burden, the Cardinal says, of over 400 years in this land, where slavery and racism find a common nexus in our country: the denial of the humanity and the dignity of other persons. As a nation, we abolished slavery legally, but we have not dealt with its enduring legacy. If we reject slavery, then we must reject and denounce all of the dehumanizing attitudes that foster any kind of discrimination, inequality, and violence. Racism can be explicit, but it also can be unrecognized and unacknowledged. Yet all of its manifestations are deadly and corrosive to civil society. Like COVID-19, which sadly has taken more of our black brothers and sisters than any other race, racism too can infect any person without regard to region, religion, race, or ethnicity. Racism is highly contagious, easily transmitted to others, and too often unseen and disguised in those seemingly healthy. Racism is a social and spiritual disease that kills people. One of the things that I think we can all take from what has become this resurgence of the civil rights movement in our day is the unifying effect that George Floyd's life and death has brought to us. The murder of George Floyd at the hands of 4 rogue police officers was tragically all too familiar to the African American community. In an earlier message, the Cardinal said, "There's a history here documented over decades in print and now in social media and on television in our homes. The history is clear and tragic. This man died at the hands of a police officer. This is a narrative which has been repeated in multiple locations across our country. The history is well documented, but it is known experientially by our sisters and brothers in the African American community in a way that so many of us have not listened to well enough." The Cardinal, towards the end of his letter, acknowledges, "We recognize that the Catholic Church in the United States must contend with our own historical complicity in slavery and our own need for racial healing. However, we all need to be a part of the solution. An important part of the legacy of the Catholic faith is our social teaching. The Church is a community of people of all colors, nationalities, and ethnicities. Catholic moral teaching is based on the fact that all people, without regard to race, religion, ethnicity, or nationality, are created in the image of God. This teaching rejects any form of racism, personal or systemic. Our faith, and the faith of all people of goodwill, calls us to leadership in breaking down barriers and standing against injustice. To violate human dignity, we believe as Christians, is to dishonor the presence of Christ in every person. Going forward, the reality of racism in our society and the moral imperative of racial equality and justice must be incorporated into our schools, our teaching, and our preaching. We must uphold the commitments to equal dignity and human rights in all institutions in our society, in politics, law enforcement, laws, economy, and education. Catholic teaching on social justice measures the way that a society acts, fairly or not. Our work will not be done until African American men, women, and children are treated equally in every aspect of life throughout these United States. And in closing, he quotes from one of my heroes, Dr. Martin Luther King, in reminding us that we need to work in a way that is united. For any of us, the singular voice of Dr. Martin Luther King still rings true. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Let us allow that love to help us to respect every black life, every human being, and to prepare to kneel in silence to reflect on those realities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those healing words, Father. Now, we will kneel for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in remembrance of George Floyd. If you are unable to kneel, stand or sit in silence, please. Thank you so much. spite of everything. Thank you all so much. I'd like to thank the speakers again.
While we are done here for today, the next civil rights movement has begun, and we are only just getting started. Thank you all.